And now, on behalf of everyone here, I'm honored to introduce tonight's honoree, the Woman of the Year, a beloved leader, teacher, activist, devoted mother and grandmother, and a true servant of the public good, Zina Kramer.
Well, I'm a bit overwhelmed, but thank you all, and I'm so pleased that you've chosen to be here this evening. I know some of you had to be pried away from Sunday night football, but here we are. I am truly humbled and I'm honored to be standing here tonight with our community in Detroit, in the United States of America, as a child of survivors of the Kovna Ghetto in Lithuania, who was born immediately after the war in Europe. To put my remarks in perspective, please understand that my mother had been a seamstress in a glove factory in Vilna before the war with 4 siblings and a loving home. My father was one of 3 children from Kovna and from a very wealthy family who had owned a textile factory. Both of them grew up leading full and fun lives and hopes and dreams. And in 1941, when they were both in their 20s, they were suddenly forced into a ghetto, a small space of Kovna where almost 30,000 people were crammed into a fenced-in area that previously held about 4,000, crammed into random rooms with very little clothing or possessions and assigned to jobs, including hard labor. Over 3 years, most of the 30,000 were either shot at a nearby medieval fort, the Ninth Fort, with some shipped to concentration camps where most would be murdered. Living in the ghetto meant constant threat of death for the crime of being Jewish. My parents, in too long a story to tell here, were part of a small group that survived the ghetto. Hidden fields and barns had me while they were homeless and ultimately came to the United States with the 2.5-year-old curly-haired toddler. Growing up, I felt different. All of my American-born friends talked about going to their grandparents' homes. I had no grandparents. My parents had an accent and spoke a mixture of Yiddish and Russian and Polish and Lithuanian, Hebrew, English, with even a smattering of Esperanto. My friends' parents sounded very American. We had no family photos scattered around our home, certainly not in beautiful old frames because the Nazis had confiscated them in the ghetto. There were no pieces of jewelry that were a mother's or grandmother's, no grandmother's candlesticks, no family heirlooms. But I grew up, and my sister, who is 9 years younger than I am, in an environment rich with survivors, friends of my parents, some of whom had lost their own children. They became the people who sewed our clothes, taught us songs, taught us stories, and were proud of our accomplishments as though we were part of their own family, their own children. Because they had all survived in different ways, they shared their stories. They argued about world issues, and most of all, they sang. They sang around our dinner table in English, in Yiddish, in Russian. They had lived through the horrible loss of parents, siblings, family, homes, possessions, and even their given names, and yet they sang. I can still hear the voices of the Levinsons, the Thatches, the Goldmans singing, and when there were celebrations, they knew how to celebrate and had not forgotten that dancing made them happy. My father would say, "When I dance with your mother and she's wearing a new dress, I feel like I own the world. But I have regrets. I regret that I didn't ask enough questions. How did they feel when they were taken from their homes? How did my father, who had gone to medical school and was brilliant, feel when he had to break rocks as a slave laborer to build an airport? How did my mother feel as the housekeeper for the Obersturmenführer, the commandant of the ghetto, when he made her stand at a window as they rounded up the children of the ghetto, put them on trucks to be killed by the Nazis in what came to be called the Children's Action? What emotions did my mother have when, through a brave courier, she found out that her family, sisters, brother, nephew, mother, had all been shot dead into a mass grave outside Vilna in the Pinar forest? How did they feel as they escaped from the Kovna ghetto just days before it was liquidated by the Nazis, as they burned down what was remaining, buildings and people, including my father's sister and his father? How did they feel when everything familiar and predictable in their lives was taken away for a totally unpredictable future? I often think, how could it have felt to be a refugee and know that you are about to have a baby with no money, no home, no friends with you, and no family? As a child, I was focused on how we were different and not appreciative of the great accomplishments my parents made by surviving, hiding in fields and stables, crossing dangerous borders to finally get to a displaced persons camp in a monastery outside of Munich. Having a child, figuring out how to get to Detroit, where my father was fortunate enough to have 4 Perlman uncles. By the way, 2 of the uncles lived on a street my parents referred to as OH10. Most of us know that as Ohio Street. Imagine having the emotional strength to create a different life in a new country with a new language, new American names, new friends, and yet maintain such gratitude for all they had. I often remember that my father thanked my mother at the end of every meal, and my mother would say everything was the best. If you gave my mother a glass of water, she would say, "Where did you get this water? It's the best I ever had." Gratitude wasn't just a word to my parents after losing everything. It was a way of life. In their honor, I would like to show my own gratitude and say thank you to the guard that allowed them to escape shortly before the ghetto was burned to the ground, to the woman who said, "God will bless you," to my mother after my mother gave her bread she took from the commandant's home at risk of being shot, to the farmers who let my parents sleep in their stables after escaping from the ghetto. Thank you to George Kadish, who risked his own life by using a hidden camera through a buttonhole of his overcoat to chronicle everyday life in the ghetto, and hiding the film in milk cans in the ground with the hope that the film would be found after the war, and snapping the photo of my mother on the ruins of that ghetto, the ruins of lives, the photo you see tonight on the screen. In the picture, she is wearing her only possession, the one dress she owned. Thank you to the man named Dimart who drove us across borders and got us to Germany and eventually our DP camp. And thank you to the nurse in Dresden who took me home and gave me food after I had typhus. Although my parents did have to kidnap me back as she wanted to keep me. I must have been adorable. Thank you to the priests and the nurses who took care of us in the DP camp. And thank you to the Kramers who allowed us to stay at the Madison Lennox when we came to the United States. Who would have known that I would meet their son, Michael Kramer, of blessed memory, 20 years later and marry him? And thank you to the Levinsons who loved to sing Russian songs around our dining room table, and to the Elperins who brought joy and teglach to us after losing their children in the war. Thank you to the Thatches with Banish Thatch, reminiscing about sharing a desk with my father in the Covenant School, and Riva for the stories about how beautiful my mother was. A huge thank you to the man who changed my life, Michael of blessed memory, without whom I would not be standing here tonight, for loving my family, my parents, my sister Anita, and their unique experiences. I thank him for going on this journey of learning with me and for being the father of our incredible children, for loving me and wanting to share my story. And thank you, Michael, for the huge, huge bonus of giving me a wonderful extended family of Goldberg, Jacob, Friedman, Huberman, and Kramer cousins and almost cousins that have enhanced my life and provided loving family that Anita and I didn't have when we were growing up. Michael, we will always love you. Thank you to my children, David and Anessa Kramer, Lisa and Josh Friedman, who demonstrate their gratitude by giving back to their communities and living the Jewish value of tikkun olam, repairing the world. Thank you to my Amerikanische sister, Anita, and her husband, Ralph Zickerman, whose father was also a survivor, and their children, Sarah and Brad, for having the interest in doing the work and uncovering more of our family history. And to my grandchildren, Sam and Max Kramer, and Sydney and Maddie Friedman, for listening to stories and caring about my heritage. My father, who called his grandchildren his dividends, had a dying wish to be at David and then Lisa's bar and bat mitzvah as a sign that even after the Holocaust, they would be free to be Jewish. He danced at both events. Janet and Jim Blanchard, who co-chaired this event, and like many of you, our adopted family, are another reason to express gratitude. Together, they have shared, encouraged, and created so many learning experiences that helped me appreciate the work of institutions that observe, create, and chronicle history. And to my friends who have indulged me as I tell my family's stories, thank you for letting me repeat the stories numerous times while you pretend to hear them for the first time, and for being generous enough to support this special event and to even fly in for this event. I hope that we can all be grateful for the good in our lives, but especially now, it is important to guard against all forms of hate if we want to protect what we have. In a time when Jews may have differences of thought on other subjects, we must stand together with our non-Jewish friends to fight anti-Semitism. I am grateful for those who are in the audience of all different faiths who chose to learn about our history and the horrors and stories of courage and survival so that we can avoid a world on repeat. Thank you all for being here tonight and your concern for learning and remembering history. And the biggest thank you to the Zeckelman Holocaust Center for preserving the past, for telling the story of our history, and the stories of people like my parents who endured the most horrific chapter in Jewish history. Fighting anti-Semitism through education is an essential means with which to fight hate. Thank you all for being here.